This episode of Talk Your Book is proudly brought to you by Spirit Technology Solutions. If you do business, do it with Spirit.
Fundies called me up, told me to take a look, but stay stubborn as bulls and talk their own book. Get the money, get the money, get the money.
Well, Heath Behncke, thanks very much for coming on Talk Your Book. Really appreciate your time. I thought before we get into your asset pick today, if you could start by telling us about Holon Global Investments and how you guys look to invest.
Yeah. Pleasure to be here, Chris. So, look, Holon was formulated with just a simple purpose of solving for accelerating innovation. That's the defining thing that I've seen throughout my investment career. If anything, it's just the pace of change has continued to accelerate. And so we set up with Holon with that purpose, and particularly for Australians, where you can see that we're very old, we're really overweight the old world. Everybody knows that, we can see that, and really we live underweight the new world, where it's actually where it's heading. So we're providing solutions that we can resolve that underweight, and also to really tackle what we think we're going into this exponential age of technological change, and we think is. What was really going to define your returns as we look forward is whether you understand that change, whether you can be actually on the right side of that change as we move forward.
And you choose to express those views in both equities and cryptocurrencies, is that right?
Yeah, so it's an interesting model because what I realised that is that the greatest value generators we can see to come out of Web 2. We can see that with what's dominating global equities today, the 7 largest mega cap companies in the world, which are still growing at some unbelievable pace. And that's all been fettered also by COVID as well. But you can see the next iteration of this in Web 3, that there's another technological platform forming in the cryptocurrency space, blockchain, distributed ledger technology. So we think it's very important that, yes, we may have a very strong view of being over being invested in Amazon today. We think it's got great prospects, but also you can see there's potential threats coming to Amazon with the new model that's starting to really gain a head of steam in particularly in the last 18 months.
And what asset did you want to speak about today?
Well, we'll touch on Filecoin. I think, Chris, is probably a good example because I think there's a lot of discussion around Bitcoin, of course, and it's quite, it's controversial to some, energy, separating, money and state, those sort of conversations. But we think actually Filecoin is a great illustration of how the technology is being utilized to really solve fundamentally big issues that exist today.
And talk to me, what is Filecoin and what's the problem they're trying to solve?
Yeah, so one of the things that I noticed back in 2016-17, it was pretty obvious back then that data privacy is one of the biggest issues. And we can see this today more clearly than ever since then. So Filecoin actually enables an open data platform where your data can be fully encrypted and not held by a third party who can control that data. You actually have control of that data. So you see today, for instance, it's very clear. You go to a platform like Apple, and the developer, develops an app of Apple. Apple's got a toll road, which they actually charge you for that. In an open data world, you could actually, as a developer, develop an application for a particular service with a great user experience, where the developer actually owns, effectively controls that application, and then also will work in the benefits of the user in that regard. So this is a very significant structural shift in the way the market will operate as we move forward. So a simple way to think of it provides governance for data, and you'd argue that like Bitcoin would provide a governance mechanism for your money in the sense what it actually solves. So it's really providing changing markets from being and you can see this in a lot of the cloud market, the way it operates today, is that you've basically got an OTC market in cloud. So when you go to talk about moving into the cloud, you'll deal with one of the major players, AWS, Azure, Microsoft Azure. You'll deal with, if you're in China, it'll be with Alibaba or Tencent. And of course, they're like you'll then negotiate contracts individually with them through the contrast and compare. But what you can see is happening. Filecoin enables a commodity market in data storage and retrieval to evolve. Which another way to think about it, Chris, is we're very familiar with iron ore markets and coal markets. It's the same thing for your data. You're actually and that has pretty significant ramifications in how we can achieve, better actually service outcomes and lower costs for the globe.
So almost in resources terminology, instead of, let's say there was only Rio and Tinto where you could buy your iron ore from, this technology is opening up a whole host of much smaller iron ore miners that you can now buy for in a data metaphor, if you like.
Yeah, essentially allows you, creates the Airbnb for data storage. So instead of having all these very centralized data repositories around the world, you can then actually look at holding the data in a distributed sense. And while a lot of the conversation starts in main data centers, over time there's a viewpoint that could even go down to your device where you've got sunk storage in your device, which could be leveraged, and you could actually be paid for in providing a data service in that way.
And what's the growth of people using the service?
Yeah, so look, we've seen quite a massive take up since the network went live in October, and basically Filecoin raised about a bit over $200 million back in mid-2017. We participated in that capital raising, and then they spent the following 3 odd years building out the blockchain, and it took some time. It's complex, but in that process, also in the lead up, they did a lot of work in terms of building out the ecosystem. So today, for an example, there's over 2,000 what they call miners on the system, or cloud service providers committing storage to the system. There's over 200 odd businesses developing on the system. There's accelerators around the system, also who are working and promoting new ideas. Filecoin has also being integrated into Ethereum, of course, which is the second biggest cryptocurrency, and that way, and Chainlink is helping with that. You tend to find that Filecoin for Web3 is it's the go-to place where Web3 is actually storing their data, is actually on Filecoin in that way. And look, the other great thing is that once the token actually listed, you could then see what the economic equation was for Filecoin in that way as well. And much like Bitcoin, etc., of course, with the price has come on, it's been up quite strongly from when they raised money, and that's providing lots of incentives for people to get involved and help building the ecosystem. And
what's its current market cap?
Yeah, this is an interesting one, Chris, because why the total tokens on issuance over time will amount to 2 billion. Like the Bitcoin blockchain, of course, over time that was built around coin issuance as miners provided security. Same thing here. What will happen over time is that the actual Filecoin block rewards are actually earned for providing storage, and there's a schedule for how that will actually be handed out over the years ahead. Approximately like 450 million will be handed out in the next 5 years around that, providing a healthy incentive up front to actually help build. So when you look at the token issuance today, though, we're still around the 70 million mark, because it's just this process over time. As each year goes by, more tokens will be issued, and those tokens are then utilized, of course, to actually build the network over time.
And you mentioned Bitcoin and in relation to this, so it's Bitcoin's proof of work. system,
Yep.
and Ethereum is moving to a proof of stake as other coins are, and this is being termed a proof of space time. Maybe talk us through that, and maybe talk us through the mining approach for Filecoin, because there are 3 different types of miners, and it's a bit different to certainly how Bitcoin's mined.
Yeah, yes, Chris. So one of the things, and you can understand from an outsider's perspective, when you look at Bitcoin and you realize there's a lot of energy being consumed, but once people start understanding why that energy is being consumed, you can rationalize the price of social scalability. That's the issue is that we know we've got an issue with the governance of our money. Those closest to the spigot can tend to manipulate it, and this has been a historical thing. But we burn energy to provide the security on the ledger to solve social scalability, so that's guaranteed. But we do have, you could argue, there's wasteful energy burnt in that process just to solve the nonce with that random function that needs to make sure that's probabilistic in terms of the outcome with the consensus. In the case of Filecoin, what the founder realized that we could do, we could actually have some useful work. We could actually get rewarded for incentivized for putting storage on the network, which people could then utilize in that way. And the crazy thing about it is also that, unlike Bitcoin mining as well, which is energy intensive, Filecoin mining is not energy intensive in that way. So you really are providing a useful form of work to prove through time that you actually have storage actually committed onto the network itself. So that in itself is quite an innovation in the space, because again, you can see why Ethereum is heading down the proof of stake work, and why there's other proofs moving to proof of stakes, because they're wanting to be more environmentally friendly, of course, but also provide the right alignment. And in the case of Filecoin, in addition to you actually putting storage on the network, you're also required to put collateral in the network too, Chris. So we hold file in the network as well, and that provides the guarantees actually on the upside, on the uptime, with making sure that our service that's in the Macquarie AirTrunk hyperscale data center, that we're guaranteeing those uptime, that there's something at stake that if we don't actually get on and actually rectify the service in that way. So we think it's actually quite an innovation to actually do useful work for society actually in that way. But essentially the way it works is that once you've loaded up, you've sealed your storage into the network, you have to consistently prove, and and the computing power required for this is not a lot. It's just consistently messaging back to the network that you're actually improving, that you have got that storage and that sector actually available in the network for someone to actually store data actually into over time.
And what's the development team like at Filecoin?
Yeah, so look, the development team, when you sit on we had this IPFS masterclass recently, and when you sit on an IPFS masterclass, you realize you're dealing with rocket scientists in the way these guys actually think. Warren Bennett came out of Stanford, and very smart, a great computer science program there. The great thing about, one of the key things and the attractions of this network as well, that we believe they've got the early network effect associated with winning the developer mindset, which is really critical with everything that we invest in, Chris. So everything I'm looking at, whether it's the Web 2 space with Google, Apple, the big companies that we see, or whether it's in this Web 3 space, you're looking for where are the developers engaged and why they're gravitating to particular networks. In the case of Filecoin, given data privacy, everybody's been affected somewhat by data privacy to some degree. It's something that people can relate to. It's easy. And of course, that for a developer is like a challenge. They really want to provide services that preserve those freedoms. Particularly, a lot of developers have that real, not quite the cypherpunk movement, but that a lot of them feel that way. It's all about self-sovereignty and making technology that you and I, as individuals, are moving in that direction. So in the case of Protocol Labs, the founders, you can see that they've got they have about 300 million tokens at their disposal over time, which they can use for development. And if you look at the Filecoin price today, it's nearly 100 Australian dollars. That's quite a significant amount of money. And then the Filecoin Foundation also has 100 million tokens. And again, a significant amount of money that they can put into development. And then, like ourselves, providing a cloud service, and the other 2,000 odd cloud service providers, and particularly the bigger ones, they're fully incentivized to actually work with developers in the ecosystem and fund the development of the ecosystem and providing the tooling, whether that be through direct grants, or whether it be through accelerators. Or give you an example here, Chris, we had a meetup with IPFS, did a masterclass. RMIT was heavily involved in that here in Australia, and a couple other universities. And at that gathering, we said, here's some Filecoin. We hand out for those who participating. So we see a lot more of that will happen going forward to actually, for those who actually contribute, there'll be ways to actually to earn in this ecosystem, which is very different than the typical the company structure and model that we actually have set up today. And when you start actually adding up the number of people involved, you very quickly realize, wow, this is on par with the big guys. Very given the when you got 2,000 odd miners, and then everybody around a lot of people around the globe actually engaging with it in terms of putting, in addition to financial resources, time and effort into building the network.
And whether or not you're a crypto enthusiast or it's not your cup of tea, it's undeniable that the value of digital assets has gone up significantly. I mean, we saw the Beeple NFT sell for $69 million. So, yeah. I mean, are those sorts of things that are going to be stored on this protocol going forward? And is there greater security on a decentralized protocol to store data than there is in those centralized names that we're more familiar with?
Yeah, so there's definitely... I suppose if you sit back, a data scientist would say to you, one of the issues that we have is great to digitize and we're creating all this this global digital economy, but the cost of actually storing anything digital has to come down over time, really materially. So that's one of the things that you could see here, that that the innovation could drive a substantial reduction in the cost of storing anything digitally. Now, some people say, hang on, the costs has all been coming down. I would actually argue, no. Cost has got to come down a lot further than what it has been. And somewhat you can see today in the margins of the very, very big cloud players like Amazon at 40%, and when they get to scale, that when they get that sizable now, it's kind of like they're looking like they got near unassailable competitive advantages in that regard. And there is an argument to say there's not as much innovation that should be going on in continue to drive down the cost. So we can see that actually coming about materially over time as a result of this. The other thing is that from a data perspective, you say a centralized versus a distributed solution, the way the underlying core technology works, the IPFS, which is essentially, if you think about the current system, we've got location-based addressing. So when you actually type in or even this Zoom meeting that we're on, that goes back to some location, some server in the way it's actually run. And actually, when you think of it, that's a pretty inefficient way to run a library. You really want to content address the library and go find the content, as opposed to go look at the location to find the content. And this is one thing that Warren Bennett realizes, hang on, that wasn't the initial intent of the internet. If you wanted to make an internet that's more resilient and mutable, lower cost, we're better having a content-based system where that content can actually be held anywhere in the system. And the benefits of this is very much like if you at the moment, if we had a few people sitting in this room and they were drawing on data under a location base, it has to go back to some location. But if that person's already got that data downloaded on their PC, then I wanted to get it, I could just pull it from their PC. It could reference that. So what you end up solving is the retrieval cost, which is really one of the big components of the cost of data today. Is one thing that having data stored, is the other thing is the retrieval cost ends up being solved. And then the redundancy with which your data, you've got more flexibility in terms of how you solve for what redundancy that you actually want actually in the data itself. And then the other thing that becomes clear is also here too, Chris, and there's positives and negatives, but we know like early this year, Trump was censored. We saw that. Now we have our views on Trump. Everybody has their views on Trump. But what I think most people say, hang on, censoring a US president, is that the right? Should we be doing that? And this is what, again, IPFS with the solution can solve that because you got control of it, right? And this is kind of important. It's very important too in freedom of speech, because we've seen this in other areas of the world where, if you've got a government that is, not in a democracy, wants to control, we've seen them cut basically the location-based addressing. If you actually shift it to this form, then they can't actually do that. It's very hard to actually to do that. So it just makes the internet far more resilient from that perspective. So in many ways, when you compare the centralized versus the distributed enables a lot more value propositions that just couldn't happen under a centralized system in the way it actually operates. So it's like it's like a step change in terms of what the innovation actually represents.
And how much Filecoin is mined in China?
Look, that's an interesting question. It's kind of like there's definitely a big following in China because of the founders. Spent a lot of time in China educating a lot of Chinese about the benefits of shifting to content-based addressing. And one, I think I did a presentation in Shanghai. I think it was back in 2016. And it was one of those pin drop moments in the room when he sort of demonstrated what could be done with the technology, and everybody went, oh, wow. So they could see that what the benefits of IPFS is. So he started getting a strong following there. And today, when you look at the blockchain itself, it depends on, like, not everybody's identifying themselves on it, but you can see the several of the largest in the top 10 are out of China in that way. So it's hard to estimate, but it's far more. It is far more decentralized today than like Bitcoin mining, because in some ways, when you think about what Bitcoin mining, it's driven really by scale's important, low cost in terms of energy and cool climates. And there's a couple provinces in China that have that in droves. So that's why the economic outcome drives that way. In the case of Filecoin, it's different because it's not energy intensive in that way from that perspective. So initial phases, when you look at the numbers, it's you'd be less than I think it'd be less than 20%. Top of my head, but it's kind of and like I say, not everybody has provided their location in terms of where they are based, but it's pretty broad spread across the world. But China's definitely a place of interest for this.
And if there's a Chinese government crackdown on cryptocurrencies broadly, and Filecoin's included, do you see that as a potential risk to the price if the government attempted there to crack down on, say, the Filecoin mining that's occurring in China?
Yeah, I mean, there's always that potential risk that the government may intervene. I think in the case of, like, when you look at Filecoin as a proposition, Chris, it's very uncontroversial in the sense of really it's a cloud service.
It doesn't have the energy usage of Bitcoin, I guess, which is a bit of a sticking point potentially.
Right, yeah, and it's very clear that the Filecoin token is a utility token that drives the actors actually in the network. And you can also see from the Chinese government's perspective, I'll give you an example. There's a group up in China. They've just announced over $1 billion yuan investment in an industrial park that will be providing a data center focused on cloud mining, cloud Filecoin mining. So you can see there's a significant economic opportunity in getting involved in this. And I don't think, like anywhere in the world, it's like the conversation we've had out here in Canberra, where Google, Facebook, what everybody's complaining about it. Hang on, they got my data. Well, actually, here's solutions that can solve that. So why would you want to crack down on the next solution that could really challenge some of the Web 2 solutions today? So, but there's definitely you can understand sometimes why on the Bitcoin side of conversation there, and some of what's happening in crypto. One of the biggest things in crypto, of course, it's just in some people talk about crypto being the wild, wild west, and you can understand that to some degree. But I only have to look in the ASX. There's 2,300 odd companies. Only less than 300 make money. And you want to encourage innovation, right? There's absolutely, you want to encourage, you don't want to stifle it. And the same thing in the crypto space, you've got, lots and lots of these assets, but, and the vast majority of them are not going to, they're not investment grade, not by a long shot. So from that side, you can understand consumer protections and that conversation that comes from governments and regulators around that. But I think this is to us what was very clear, and this is the great thing about Filecoin. When we talk to people about it, they can actually see, oh, hang on, that makes a lot of sense. And we could solve that big issue in Web 2, and then we can drive a lot of efficiencies out of it. And hang on, those numbers are pretty material. So you tell them we could invest in data centers in Australia supporting this? Yeah, you could actually, and we could fund a whole development community. Absolutely, you could fund a whole development community, all aimed at moving us on from Google, Facebook.
And so for my own perspective, as a sort of a more experienced in equity investing, to break it down, you've got 70 million coins currently on issue.
Yeah.
$100 US a coin, $100 Oz.
Oz, I think, at the moment.
So call it market cap currently is $5 billion US. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Fully diluted, it'll be about 13 billion. If full 200 million coins are issued and the price is the same as today, you'd say fully diluted market cap of about 13 bill.
Oh, no, fully diluted, 2 billion tokens timed by 100. So you're talking
200 bill.
200 billion.
200 bill, fully diluted.
Yeah.
So then you've got to take a view on the total addressable market for data centers.
Yep.
And then you've got to try and decide what portion of that you think Filecoin can get.
Yeah. Yeah.
Before working out. I mean, that's a rough way to value this in terms of a business sense.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a bit like, I suppose a good analogy would be if you look at SME accounting, desktop versus cloud. And you think about that in the Australian context, Chris. So MYOB back in the day, like we've always had around 2 million SMEs in the country, even since 2000. It's grown a little bit over time, of course, as SME formation. This is according to the ABS stats. But prior to SME accounting being in the cloud, you found that the addressable market was actually only like 600,000 of that 2 million viewed as valuable. Today, what we've found is that the market size is actually much larger than what we think, because there's actually the ABS was underestimating how many businesses. But essentially, by shifting into cloud, you'll never go back to your desktop. We save all this time and effort on bookkeeping, etc. You got real-time information on your business, so the value proposition went up very substantially. Notwithstanding also, Chris, that you're paying the same price per month as a subscription. So you grew the market very enormously. So in the case here, it's like when you move it from centralized to distributed data, and it's an open source platform, it's a very similar analogy that you find that you're going to create a whole bunch of innovation you can't predict as a result of that. You're going to have the potential to materially lower the price of providing that service. And then the whole data sphere is growing exponentially. So these are the factors to weigh it up. And it's a bit like when you look at the Bitcoin conversation again, what we say to a lot of people to get off zero is there is a probability here that we might shift across to a system based on purchasing power. And around Bitcoin, you can build a financial system. We're seeing this because we invested in a bank in Wyoming that's doing it. So what you realize even on that side is just the numbers can get very, very large. It's hard to estimate. Like, you just know the value proposition is strong, the tailwinds are there. What we say to people, and for our perspective, I've got big positions in cloud. I really want, but I need to know where this goes. I need to know how data is going to shift, and I need to understand that. And that's why we see Filecoin as an opportunity with that. But it's also really about making sure that we're over where that conversation actually heads. And the way to think about some of this is infrastructure for the digital age. And that's why, which everybody can use. And it's not, and what we'll find is there will be companies, unicorns will build around this, just what's happening with Bitcoin. And then when you kind of realize, well, hang on, that Bitcoin can be very large, Filecoin can be very large. That's kind of what we're seeing, the key pieces of infrastructure from that perspective. So that's the way we sort of think about it. And it's really, to be definitive on valuation is harder to know, but you just know there's a very strong value proposition with a very strong community engagement and movement behind it, where you can see very fertile ground being laid to create something that will really help society. So that's the kind of, it's like a bit like you have a little bit in your portfolio, hold it there, study it, watch it over time, goes to zero, it's not going to kill you, but this could change your life, that kind of conversation.
And I guess too, that portfolio approach is key, because you haven't sold your Amazon shares to go all in on Filecoin, have you? You sort of, if this doesn't work and it stays with Azure or AWS, where you're going to be covered.
Yep.
And if this really does disrupt and takes the margin away from those big dominant monopolies currently, then you're going to share in that upside.
Exactly right. And look, I think the other key thing here is, data's fundamental. Data storage is going to be, it's like insurance, it's fundamental. Like, you need it, you can't get away from it. So it can't be substituted in that regard. So that's very clear from that side of things. And to really, when you start going into the ecosystem and you realize what YouTube may look like in this system, you kind of go, yeah, okay. And I need to know that, because I've got forecasts on YouTube for Google, which is they're going to monetize that. You know that as a media guy, that conversation. So it's kind of like, for us to be across where this could actually head in that way, and how data could shift, is what's really key in terms of feeding into our investment process.
Beautiful. Well, I appreciate the time, mate. It's been great to go down the Filecoin rabbit hole with you. And it's a crazy new world out there. So appreciate you walking me through it.
Pleasure to be on, Chris, and have a chat. It's great.
This episode of Talk Your Book is proudly brought to you by Spirit Technology Solutions. If you do business, do it with Spirit. If you're enjoying Talk Your Book, make sure you subscribe to Chris Judd Invest.